Love doesn't usually end with an announcement. It doesn't disappear in a single argument or dramatic confrontation. It fades, quietly, gradually, in small, nearly imperceptible shifts that accumulate over weeks, months, sometimes years. Most men miss these early signs, not because they're oblivious, but because the changes are subtle. A conversation that feels slightly less engaged, a touch that happens less frequently, a tone that's polite but no longer warm. Individually, these moments seem insignificant, but collectively, they tell a different story. The truth is, emotional withdrawal often happens long before behavioral change becomes obvious. A woman can stop loving you emotionally while still performing the routines of the relationship. She can still cook dinner, still ask how your day was, still share the same bed. But beneath the surface, something fundamental has shifted. And that shift, quiet, internal, often unspoken, is what we're going to examine today. This is not about creating paranoia. It's not about interpreting every small change as evidence of disaster. It's about developing the emotional awareness to recognize patterns. Because patterns, not isolated incidents, reveal the truth about where a relationship actually stands. Love, when it begins to fade, leaves footprints. And those footprints are visible long before the final conversation happens. Today, I'm going to walk you through 7 hidden signs that a woman may no longer love you the way she once did. Not to alarm you, not to make you question everything, but to give you the clarity to see what's actually happening so you can address it, or at least understand it, with dignity. Let's get to it. Before we look at the specific signs, it's important to understand the psychology of how emotional withdrawal actually works. Attachment doesn't dissolve overnight, it erodes, and that erosion follows a predictable pattern rooted in what psychologists call emotional investment decline. When someone is emotionally invested in a relationship, they put energy into maintaining it. They ask questions. They initiate connection. They prioritize the other person's experience. They invest time, attention, and emotional labor into keeping the bond strong. But when that investment begins to decline, the effort decreases. Not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually. They stop asking as many questions. They stop initiating as often. They stop prioritizing the relationship in the same way they once did. This is what I call emotional economy. Every relationship operates on an economy of care, attention, and effort. And when one person starts withdrawing their contributions, when they begin conserving their emotional resources rather than spending them on the relationship, it signals a shift in how they value the connection. The key is recognizing that this withdrawal is often unconscious. A woman doesn't wake up one day and decide to stop loving you. The process is far more gradual. She starts feeling less fulfilled, less seen, less drawn to the relationship. And as those feelings accumulate, her behavior begins to reflect the internal distance she's experiencing. What we're about to explore are the external signs of that internal shift. And understanding them is not about assigning blame. It's about developing awareness. Because awareness, even when it reveals uncomfortable truths, is always better than operating in denial. If this resonates, subscribe to Femme Psychology with Emma. We explore relationship psychology with clarity, not drama. Sign 1. Reduced emotional curiosity. When a woman loves you, she's genuinely interested in your internal world. She asks about your day, not as a formality, but because she wants to understand what you're experiencing. She follows up on things you mentioned previously. She notices shifts in your mood and asks what's behind them. But when that love begins to fade, the curiosity disappears. She still might ask, "How was your day?" But it's perfunctory, a social script rather than genuine interest. And when you answer, she doesn't probe deeper. There are no follow-up questions, no interest in the details. The conversation stays surface level because she's no longer emotionally invested in understanding you. Here's a realistic scenario. You come home after a difficult day at work. You mention something that happened, something that frustrated or challenged you. In the past, she would have asked questions, wanted to know more, offered her perspective, or simply listened with engagement. But now she nods, says something vague like, "That's tough," or "I hope it gets better." And then the conversation moves on. There's no depth, no curiosity, no real emotional engagement with what you just shared. That shift from genuine interest to polite acknowledgement is significant. Because curiosity is a reflection of care. When someone cares about you, they want to know you. Not just the logistics of your day, but the emotional texture of your experience. And when that curiosity fades, it's often because the emotional investment has already begun to decline. This doesn't mean every conversation needs to be deep, but if you notice a consistent pattern where she no longer engages with your inner world, it's worth paying attention to. Sign 2. Conflict avoidance instead of repair. In healthy relationships, conflict happens, but what matters is what comes after. When both people are invested, they work toward resolution. They talk things through. They apologize. They make efforts to repair the emotional rupture. But when love fades, conflict is handled differently. She doesn't engage. She doesn't argue. She doesn't fight for resolution. She simply withdraws, disengages, lets the tension sit unresolved because she's no longer invested enough to do the work of repairing it. This is often misinterpreted as her being easier to live with. She's not picking fights anymore. She's not pushing back. But that absence of conflict isn't peace, it's apathy. Here's the psychology. When someone is emotionally invested, they care enough to be upset. They care enough to express frustration or disappointment. They care enough to want things to be better. But when that investment declines, the emotional intensity fades, and what replaces it is not calm, it's indifference. A realistic scenario. You do something that would have bothered her in the past. Maybe you forgot an important date. Maybe you made a decision without consulting her. In the past, this would have led to a conversation, maybe a disagreement, maybe some tension that eventually got resolved. But now she doesn't say anything. She doesn't bring it up. She doesn't seem upset. And you think, that's good. She's mellowing out. But what's actually happening is that she's stopped caring enough to engage. The emotional labor of conflict feels pointless to her because she's no longer invested in the outcome. Disengagement is not the same as peace. And when conflict stops happening, not because the relationship is stronger, but because she's emotionally withdrawn, it's a sign worth noticing. Sign 3. Decreased physical warmth. Physical touch is one of the clearest indicators of emotional connection. When a woman loves you, she initiates touch naturally. She reaches for your hand. She leans into you on the couch. She touches your arm when she's talking to you. These small gestures are unconscious expressions of affection and comfort. But when love fades, those gestures disappear. She doesn't pull away dramatically. She just stops initiating. The spontaneous touches become less frequent. The physical closeness becomes something that only happens when you initiate it, and even then, it feels obligatory rather than genuine. Here's what this looks like in practice. You're sitting together watching a show. In the past, she would have leaned into you, rested her head on your shoulder, reached for your hand without thinking about it. But now, there's space between you. She's on her side of the couch, and you're on yours. And that space, physical and emotional, feels wider than it used to. Or you reach for her hand while you're walking, and she holds it for a moment, but then lets go. Not because she's carrying something or needs her hand free, just because the connection doesn't feel natural to her anymore. This is not about demanding affection. It's about recognizing that physical warmth is often a reflection of emotional warmth. And when the physical closeness declines, It's usually because the emotional closeness has already started to fade. Again, isolated moments don't define a pattern, but if you notice a consistent reduction in how often she initiates touch, how long she maintains physical closeness, or how naturally affection flows between you, it's worth acknowledging. Sign 4. Disappearance of future language. When someone is invested in a relationship, they naturally think and speak in terms of we. They make plans that include you. They reference future experiences you'll share together. When we go on that trip, next year I was thinking we could, but when emotional investment declines, that language shifts. We becomes I. Future planning becomes individualistic. She stops referencing shared experiences because, consciously or unconsciously, she's no longer mentally including you in her long-term vision. Here's the psychology. Future language is a form of mental commitment. When you talk about future plans with someone, you're signaling that you expect them to be part of your life moving forward. But when someone stops using that language, it often means they've begun to imagine a future that doesn't necessarily include you. A realistic scenario. She mentions wanting to take a trip. In the past, it would have been framed as, we should go to, but now it's, I've been thinking about going to. The shift is subtle, but significant. Or you bring up something happening next year, and her response is vague, non-committal. She doesn't engage with the idea of planning for it together, not because she's unsure about the logistics, but because she's unsure about the relationship. This doesn't mean every statement needs to be framed as we. But if you notice a consistent pattern where she's stopped including you in her future thinking, it's a sign that her emotional investment has shifted. People plan for what they value, and when the planning stops, the valuing has often already changed. Sign 5. Emotional neutrality. When a woman loves you, she experiences a range of emotions with you. Joy, frustration, warmth, occasional irritation, laughter, tenderness. The relationship has emotional texture because she's emotionally present. But when love fades, that texture flattens. She becomes polite but distant, calm but cold. There's no emotional intensity, positive or negative. She's pleasant, but not warm, agreeable, but not engaged. This is often mistaken for maturity or emotional stability. She's so calm now, so easy to be around. But what's actually happening is emotional withdrawal. She's not calm because she's at peace. She's calm because she's detached. Here's the psychology. Emotional neutrality is a form of self-protection. When someone is pulling away emotionally, they often flatten their affect to avoid conflict, avoid vulnerability, and avoid the discomfort of acknowledging what's actually happening. A realistic scenario, you share something exciting that happened to you. In the past, she would have matched your energy, been genuinely happy for you, celebrated with you. But now, her response is muted. That's great. Flat tone, minimal engagement. She's not being unkind. She's just not emotionally present. Or you're going through something difficult, and her response is sympathetic but distant. She says the right things, but there's no emotional depth behind them. She's responding out of social obligation, not genuine care. Emotional neutrality is one of the clearest signs of detachment, because when someone is emotionally invested, they feel with you. And when they stop feeling, it's often because they've already begun the process of letting go. Sign 6. Independent decision-making without inclusion. In healthy partnerships, decisions, especially significant ones, are made collaboratively. Not because one person controls the other, but because both people value each other's perspective and want to move through life as a unit. But when emotional investment declines, that collaboration stops. She makes plans without mentioning them. She decides things that affect both of you without asking your input, not because she's trying to exclude you, but because she's no longer thinking of the relationship as a partnership. Here's what this looks like. She makes weekend plans without checking if you're available. She makes a financial decision without discussing it. She accepts an invitation or commits to something that impacts your shared schedule, and you only find out after the fact. In the past, she would have consulted you, not because she needed permission, but because she valued your perspective and saw you as part of her decision-making process. But now, you're an afterthought. She's operating independently because internally, she's already begun to separate. This doesn't mean she needs to ask your permission for everything. Autonomy is healthy. But there's a difference between healthy independence and emotional exclusion. When someone consistently makes decisions without considering how they impact you or the relationship, it's often because they've stopped prioritizing the relationship in their internal hierarchy. Sign 7. Your intuition feels something is missing. Now we come to the 7th and most important sign. This is the hardest sign to articulate because it's not about behavior, it's about energy. It's the sense that something has shifted even if you can't point to a specific moment or action. It's the quiet awareness that she's there, but not really there, that the emotional presence you once felt has faded. Often men dismiss this feeling. They tell themselves they're overthinking, that everything is fine, that they're being paranoid. But intuition is rarely wrong. Because intuition is your nervous system picking up on patterns your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. It's the accumulation of all the small shifts, the reduced curiosity, the emotional neutrality, the physical distance that your body registers before your mind admits. Here's the truth. When love is present, you feel it. Not just in what someone says or does, but in the energy between you. There's warmth, connection, a sense of being seen and valued. But when that love fades, the absence is palpable, even if nothing dramatic has happened, even if the routines continue. You feel the distance. And that feeling, that gut-level awareness that something fundamental has changed, is often the most reliable indicator of all. If you feel it, don't dismiss it. Pay attention to it, because your intuition is responding to real shifts, even if those shifts haven't been named yet. If you recognize one or more of these signs in your relationship, the first thing to do is not panic. Patterns matter more than isolated incidents. One moment of emotional distance doesn't mean love is gone, but a consistent pattern of withdrawal does warrant attention. The mature response is not to accuse or demand. It's to observe, to create space for honest conversation, to ask, calmly and without blame, if she's feeling distant, to express what you've noticed without making her defensive. Sometimes these patterns emerge because of external stress, personal struggles, or temporary disconnection that can be repaired with communication and effort. But sometimes they're signs of something deeper, and if that's the case, awareness allows you to make decisions from a place of clarity rather than denial. Emotional maturity is about facing reality with dignity. And that means being willing to see what's actually happening, even when it's uncomfortable. Love doesn't disappear overnight, but it does fade, quietly, gradually, through patterns that once recognized tell a clear story. If you've noticed these signs, it doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is over, but it does mean something has shifted, and that shift deserves attention. Because the worst thing you can do is ignore the erosion until it's too late to address it. Emotional clarity is not about control. It's about self-respect. It's about knowing where you stand so you can make informed decisions about how to move forward. And whether that means working to rebuild what's been lost or accepting that it's time to let go, clarity gives you the power to act with dignity. Love, when it fades, leaves footprints. And those footprints are visible long before the final words are spoken. Pay attention to them, not with fear, but with the quiet courage to face what's real. Which of these signs resonated most with you? Comment below. I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. And if you value emotional clarity in relationships, subscribe to Femme Psychology with Emma. I'll see you in the next one.